It's the first day we're saying Tachnun. 20 days. The last time we said Tachnun was Yom Kippur. But Yom Kippur this year was Shabbos. So we just said Avinu Malkeinu in Ne'ilah. Now, one of the ideas that the Rebbe points out is the Rebbe has this ability to always say that today is the most important day in the world. I once saw a Reshimah, I think it was a Shavuos, and the Rebbe was sitting upstairs by the Sudas. And somebody said to the Rebbe a question about Purim. Because there's a whole thing about Purim and Shavuos. Purim is connected to Torah, to Nasa v'Nishma, and Shavuos is connected to Nasa v'Nishma. And in the Maimorim, they say that Purim's Nasa v'Nishma is higher than Shavuos' Nasa v'Nishma. So somebody asked the Rebbe a question about Purim, and the Rebbe's answer was, It's Trevesach nicht. Now I don't know. Now you could decide what the Rebbe meant. But everybody understands that that's the Pshat the Rebbe vergessen. Now I don't know. Now it's Shavuos. We're talking about Shavuos, we can talk about Shavuos. Purim, I don't know. So when it's Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. When it's Beis Mar Cheshvan is the holiest day of the year. Now how could Beis Mar Cheshvan possibly be the holiest day of the year? And the first step is the first ordinary day in the first ordinary month after Tishrei. Right? And we have this whole thing. The Rebbe spoke about this. Noach, I think in Nun Beis. We're already in Lech Lecha, because Simchas Torah was Friday. But the idea is still true. That what? Tishrei is a special Chodesh. And of course in special Chodashim we do special Inyanim of Avodah, we do special Avodas Hashem. And you're busy, what the Rebbe calls in the Sichos, Musafim Kilchasam. You're busy with the extraordinary. You're not busy with the daily, with the regular. You're busy with what's extraordinary. Musafim Kilchasam. And of course, when you're busy with extraordinary, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of energy. But of course, the way we learn it in Chassidus, the Eibishter created a Yom Tov season, not for the sake of the Yom Tov season. The Eibishter created the Yom Tov season that after Yom Tov, this should be a good regular. Right? The Eibishter created this special so that you should take from the Seders of the Yom Ne'iroyim Al Kol Hashana Kula, right? The marshal of the king in the field, right? If you carry it through, the king goes into the field. And then he invites the peasants into his palace. And then he tells the peasants, V'yankev holach l'darke. But it says in the Rebbe Marash that V'yankev holach l'darke actually begins Motzei Yom Kippur. They mentioned it in one of the Sichos. So if Motzei Yom Kippur starts the Yankev holach l'darke, what's the Geshen Mitzukah? It's a Poshet Azach. The peasants don't go home. They're not in a rush. They just spend time with the king. First the king came to them, and then the king invited them into his palace. So they fabrek Sukkos, they fabrek Simchas Torah. So there's another V'yankev holach l'darke. After they finish taking the whole Sederos that they got from the Melech during the first half of Yom Ne'iroyim in the Kava Yireh, as the Rebbe says it, and in the second half of Tishrei in the Kava Simcha, and in Proshta Verter, when you take the intensity of the Avodah of Tishrei and you translate it into Simcha, you bring it into a language which is comfortable for us. Big tzaddikim are very serious people. Poshet Yidden, seinen Freilicher, right? And in case you don't agree with me, I'll tell you a story. It's a Moedendike Maise. It's not Negei Aherzu, but it's still a Geschmack Maise. So by mail it's Negei Aherzu. It's Serir Ton Do. What's the story? The Friedrich writes that in the very early years, when his father was a young man, after the Stalkos of Rebbe Marash, Lubavitch was very small. And he describes a Yid coming into his father, the Rebbe Rashab, Erev Yom Kippur in the morning. And the Rebbe Rashab was very vertracht. It was, I don't know what year it was, Nun Aleph, but it was in the years that Lubavitch was so small, it was almost informal. It wasn't before the Rebbe was Makabel the Messias officially. Anyway, he was close to Lubavitch, to the Rabbeim, I don't know. I think he was one of those Chassidim who used to provide a service. Either they used to make Beim Lag Beimer Fabrengen, or they used to provide wheats for matzahs, or water for Maim Shalom. He was a Pshashtikl Macher. And he comes into the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab is completely in his own world. And he walks with the Rebbe Rashab with Simcha Rabbi and says, Rebbe, give me lekach. Give me lekach. So the Rebbe looks up at him. And the eyes of the Rebbe say, look at you with your hispashtas over here. The Rebbe doesn't say anything. He doesn't need the Rebbe to say anything, so he responds. He says, Mir seinen Soldaten. We are soldiers. Uns hat man gelernt, als Erev Yom Kippur fahr halben Tag, darf man sein freilich. Und noch halben Tag, darf sein Meridus. We were taught that Erev Yom Kippur, until Chtzos, you have to be B'Kavas Simcha, and after Chtzos, you have to be in a state of Meridus. So the Friedrich Rebbe says in the Sikha, where he tells the story, dem Taten is der Wort sehr gefallen geworden. My father liked it. He liked, there was an exchange. The Rebbe didn't say a word, you understand? Anyway, we have an easier time with Simcha than with Meridus. And verkehrt, if a chassid from the Rebbe Rashab, who the Rebbe Marash, had an easier time with Simcha than Meridus, then we for sure have an easier time with Simcha than Meridus. And that's what Sukkot is. Sukkot is, like it says in Chassidus, B'kesel L'yem Chageinu. You translate the Kavayira of the Yom Neiroyim and the Yemei Asliches and Chedesh Elul into the Kava Simcha of Sukkot. And then you go, V'yankav Halachadarke. V'yankav Halachadarke means you go back. And you go to the Darkei, it's not the Eibishter's derech, it's your derech. But of course, your derech is the derech of the Eibishter. So right after Simchas Torah, you say V'yankav Halachadarke. Right after Shabbos Bereish, you say Yalach Halachadarke. And in Mitzvah Hashem Zayin Cheshvan, which is this Shabbos, which is this Friday, but there's a V'yankav Halachadarke of today. Today is the first day in Cheshvan. What happens in Cheshvan? Nothing. What's happening in Cheshvan? Nothing. It's a prostatug, it's a plain, simple day, and therefore there is something special about the ordinary. And for us, it's a very, very special day, because we're back in Beis Chayenu, and we miss 770. I mean, I don't know what to say. The shurim went on, but the people aren't there, and the energy, and the background noise. The background noise is very important for this shurim. Anyway, so we're back. Here we are. We're learning Tanya. Believe it or not, we haven't learned Tanya in Achveisnet Vilang. We're learning Tanya today, and we're in the middle of Perek Beis. Now, as somebody already pointed out, everybody who comes to my classes has an impeccable memory. Nobody ever forgets anything I ever said. So you all remember exactly punct what we discussed in the last shir, which was probably 5 weeks ago. To be very honest, if I hadn't written myself notes here, I wouldn't remember either where we learned last time. So I'm going to give you a brief review, and then we're going to learn something new. I'm going to speak a Naya Inyan. I mean, I remember where I was holding, to be honest. We started off this Perek, and we got stuck. It took us a long time to get through it. That a neshama is a chelik elakavi mal mamish. A neshama is a piece of the Eibishter. And we had two expressions for this. The first expression is that a neshama is a chelik elakavi mal mamish. That was the first expression. And the second expression is that Yisrael olu b'machshava, that the neshama comes from chokhmah. Two ways of saying the same thing. The first way is chelik elakavi mal mamish. The second way is from chokhmah. And we spent a lot of time explaining that. Then came a question. The question is, if every neshama is a chelik elakami mal mamish, if every neshama comes from chokhmah elah, chokhmah datzilus, how come not all neshamas are the same? So the Alter Rebbe said, it's true, all neshamas start out as a chelik elakami mal mamish, and they diversify. And he gave us a mashal. What was the mashal that he gave us? He gave us the mashal from a fetus, from a baby. Yeah? Kvayachol k'mashal haben. We learned this already, but we'll learn it again. How many lines is it into the page? I mean, I don't have a normal Tanya here. It's on page 12, should be. Around 10 lines into the page, I'm going to guesstimate. I don't have a normal Tanya, so it's very hard for me to know. 10 lines into the page, yeah? We'll read quick. We did this already last time. K'mashal haben, for example, a son, hanimshach mimoyach ha'av, that comes from the mind of his father, sha'afilu tzipornei raglav, even the toenails, nizhava mitipazu mamish, also form from the original point, from the original seed, which is the tipa of the me'ach ha'av. How? Al yedei shehiyasa, by hesitating, by pausing, by waiting, Tisha Chadoshim bebeten ha'em, 9 months in the rechem, in the mother's stomach, v'yarda mi madrega le madrega, descends from step to step, le'ishtane, so that it should change, u'lezhaves mi menetzi panayim, and to create all the different parts of a baby until you have toenails. And the Rebbe says, you should know that Takit is all kinds of things, right? A baby has a brain, a baby has a heart, a baby has eyes, and a baby has fingernails and toenails and skin and hair. You're not going to compare a heart or a piece of brain, the matter of a brain, to a toenail. But it's still connected. Because nevertheless, it's still tied and unified in a wondrous and a very strong union in its earlier essence. Which was the point of the mayach of the father and the mother, as we discussed. And even after the baby is born, he's still living from that tipa. Unikas, hatzipanayim, v'chayusam, the life even of the toenails is me'ameach shabarash, comes from the brain. The Gemara says, Levin should remain a gidim b'atomas v'tzipanayim, and he brings k'meshkasa b'yitzayim sharach hashmal b'seid levushim shel adam risha b'ganeiden shoyu tzipanayim b'mechenes me'ech tfun. Stop. I just read again what I did with you at least 5 Sundays ago. At least 5 Sundays ago was Mastama Slichas, so it wasn't 5 Sundays ago. Yeah, it was 6 Sundays ago at least. It's been a while since we learned Tanya, and l'chayre we're back. Right? We wait so long, you forget that it's never going to be normal again. Anyway, it's cheshvan. We're back. We're here. So what's the word? All neshamas start out the same, but they don't all remain the same. And I discussed with you at length before Yom Tiv, if they all start out the same, why don't they stay the same? I'll tell you the reason. It's going to shock you. You know why? Because that's what the Eibishter wants. What a surprise. They all start out the same. They all end up different. Why? Azay vil der Eibishter. That's what the Eibishter wants. You know, today in biology, there's a big shturim about what they call stem cells. Right? What are stem cells? Stem cells are organic cells that can become many different things. They can become heart cells, they can become brain cells, they can become eye cells, they can become blood cells, they can become cells that become marrow, they can become bone. But the cells that a human being has after the baby develops and is born are specialized, right? You have certain cells that become a heart, certain cells that become an eye, certain cells that become a brain. And if a person needs heart cells, right? The Chas v'Shalom, they had an event in their heart, and some of their heart cells died. They don't work anymore. So you have to put new cells into them to make them live. But you have to find cells that are going to become heart cells. You can't just put cells from the kidneys into the heart. That's not going to work. The problem is the cells are all specialized. So there's a concept, it's still a theory, called stem cells. Stem cells, those cells that don't yet have a definition, you can teach them. If a person has brain damage, you can teach them to take the place of the cells that died, because brain cells have very, very, very long lives. They're very difficult to replace, or almost impossible to replace, or impossible to replace. I don't know, I'm not a biologist. And the same is true heart cells. So some cells, the body replenishes very quickly, like blood cells and skin, but some cells are very, very long lasting. So there's a cell that doesn't yet have a specific definition, so they become anything. So all the neshamas start out the same, and then they become all different. So let's talk about the biology. Yeah? So if all the cells start out the same, so how do they become different? So of course the scientists are going to explain to you on myself DNA, and I'm sure it's all true on a physical level. The answer is Azay vil der Eibishter. That's the answer to the question. How does one single cell that has in itself the possibility to be a complete person, so which part is going to become the eye and which part is going to become the heart? And of course it all has to be perfect. The miracle of childbirth is so staggering that we're not staggered by it. The miracle of a healthy child being born. And the vast majority of the children born in this world are born healthy. It's such a ness. It's this. I told you this last time. I know a guy, he's a doctor. Every time his wife was pregnant, he was ois mensch. I said, what's the big deal? He says, because I know everything that can go wrong, you understand? Baruch Hashem, it's such a ness. A baby is born, it's such a ness. Golim, is that the eigen? A ness. Why does it work? The Eibishter wants. And the same is true in the Neshamas. We all start out, take, chelik and lakam yimal mamish. Yisrael olav machshav and chachmila, chachmadat tzilas. And because the Eibishter wants, one becomes many. So what I want to do today, what I left for today, is to talk about this a little bit. The way the Neshamas work is it goes from big to little, right? It's called onaf min hashedish. It's an expression which is used in Kabbalah Svarim, like branches from a trunk, from a root, from a base. And there's a series of steps in the development of the neshama. This is not complicated. It's math. It's not complicated at all. All neshamas start out as one. That's the neshama of Adam Arishan. Which means Adam Arishan, when he came into this world, the Gashmias, and of course this is important to appreciate, whenever you speak about Gilgul Neshamas, a man and a woman is one soul. A Zochar and Adam and Chava are one. They're not two, they're one neshama. Whatever Adam Arishan, Adam and Chava together comprise the neshama of Adam Arishan. Whatever the pilpul and Gilgul is, but that's the Metzias. In Adam's neshama, there was every Yid who would ever live until Mashiach. Mamish. A minute. Wait a few seconds, yeah? Wait, give me a few seconds to speak. So Adam Arishan encompasses within himself every neshama that's ever going to exist. So he was a very high neshama. Api Kabbalah, he's Adam Kadman. Very high madreg. From Adam's neshama comes 7 neshamas. 7 neshamas. And of course, what these 7 neshamas are depends where you look. But we'll accept what says in Zohar, right? It's Avraham and Yitzchak and Yankiv and Moshe and Aaron and Yosef and David. These are neshamas kloliyes. There are 7 branches. From these 7 branches, you have 600,000. That's basically the math. There's 600,000 neshamas kloliyes that come from these 7 branches. Now, there's a lot of details to this, obviously. But this is how it operates, right? There's the big neshama, and from the big neshama comes smaller neshamas, and from the smaller neshamas comes smaller neshamas still. So there's 600,000 neshamas. So it says in Chumash that 600,000 Yidden left Mitzrayim. That's not exactly 600,000. It's 600,000 and change, right? 300 and something, 3,000 and something, or 1,500. But Api Kabbalah, there's 600,000 neshamas. Sharashiyes, which goes on the 6 midas. It's brought in my Marach Sidus. There's 6 midas: Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayd, and Yesod. Each one is multiplied to the 5th power. 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. 600,000 neshamas. So it starts out as 1, and 1 becomes 7, and then 7 becomes 600,000. And each one of those 600,000, theoretically, underlined, theoretically, has 600,000 sparks. In other words, if in I don't know how to say this, in a perfect world or in the most imperfect world, the maximum neshamas that could be that are associated with Adam Arishan. Now this is important to point out because there's a concept of neshamas that are not connected to Adam Arishan. Also, Lavid is going to be neshamas chadoshes. It says in Kabbalah. It's brought in L'Kutei Torah, which is how I know it, that the Mashiach comes is going to be new neshamas. For such new neshamas that they're not included in Adam Arishan. But the neshama of Adam Arishan includes 600,000 neshamas, which are the 600,000 Yidden that left Mitzrayim, and each one of them has 600,000 possible sparks. And of course, the consequence of this is that there's different levels. Adam Arishan is Chochmei Allah, Chochmei Atzilus. The 7 neshamas which come from the neshama of Adam Arishan are the midas of Atzilus. And the rest of the neshamas are in Malchus of Atzilus. Malchus of Atzilus is a pretty nice place to be, I got to tell you, yeah? But those of us who are Gilgulim, we're not from those 600,000 original neshamas. And some of us are not even Gilgulim from them. We're a Gilgul of a Gilgul of a Gilgul. Yeah? So that's how it happens. You understand? There's big neshamas, there's medium neshamas, there's little neshamas, there's teeny neshamas, there's teeny tiny neshamas, and there's teeny tiny neshamas. And that's us. There's all different kinds of neshamas. Hecher neshamas, or nidirik neshamas. But the point is, you see a mushal in a baby. It starts out as 1. And when you look at that 1, there's indistinguishable. You cannot see which part of that 1 is going to become what part. And of course, one of the ideas that Chassidus points out, what is the first thing that forms in a child? What's the first thing that forms? The shilya. The shilya. What the shilya means? The sac. What's it called? The amniotic sac. Klipa kedem lepri. It says in Chassidus, right? Klipa kedem es lepri. When the baby is born, you're going to throw the sac away. But it came first. That's how it works. And that also forms from that original nekuda. So there's a klipa kedem es lepri. However you explain this by Neshamas Yisrael, we all start out as 1 and we diversify, we become many. So the point is, there's greater neshamas and there's lesser neshamas. But the Alter Rebbe's emphasis is that even though there's neshamas that are very, very high, and the neshamas that are neshamas of Atzilus, And neshamas of Atzilus itself, there's levels. And then there's neshamas in the lower worlds. Until you have what Al Rebbe calls the Perigit Ches. Nefesh, the Malchus, the Asiyah. The bottom of the barrel. Nefesh, the lowest neshamas that could possibly be. They're part of the same body. They're part of the same composite. They're part of the same Achdus. They came from the same source. They continue to be connected to the same source. And Seif Kol Seif, they are one with their source. So it remains true. It remains true. Ve'im kol zeh oideno kshuro miyuchedes v'mehusa v'atzmusa harishin sh'mu'atzmus mehus meyach ha'af. Even though you have neshamas like ours, right? And the Eibishter knows exactly what He created for our illustrious generation, right? The lowest neshamas imaginable that could possibly be. We are connected to the highest neshamas, and ultimately we're one with the highest neshamas. We are a chelik elakami ma'al mamish. Now, but then we went through a little bit more of ishtalshalos. But the fact that we went through a little more of ishtalshalos doesn't change the fact that we came from Chokhmah, that we're attached to Chokhmah, and that bepnimius we continue to be Chokhmah.
Question: Where did the goyim neshamas come?
After the Chet, of course, after the Chet. That may be the klipa gedemes lapri that I didn't want to say. Yeah, after the Chet, if Adam and Chava don't eat mitzvahs tevarah, there's no goyim. As they should in Kabbalah's form. And because of the Chet of Adam and Eitzadas Tevarah, they created Nefashis of U'Misha'ilam. Right? There's a Taisvis, I love to say this Taisvis. I heard it from Mitchell at Eidport. I'm saying B'Shem Ha'imei, maybe Gula L'Yelam. He said it in a drosha, Ergitzvu. That Taisvis says that until the Yidden were separated, every Goy, until Matan Torah, is a potential Yid. And he brings Reis up in Nigla. Every Goy, before Atav HaChatonim Mikol Ha'amim, till before the Eibishter chose the Jewish people, which happens at Har Sinai, not Avram Avinu. Har Sinai is a potential Yid. Very interesting. Okay, so let's learn. Okay, so this is a simple idea. It's just important to understand the math. There's a Maimon in Bamidbar. Bamidbar, you have the count of the Jewish people, right? The 600,000. So of course the question is, why? Who cares about that count? I mean, Chlal, you have in this Torah stories, they seem to be so time constrained. When Yidden left Mitzrayim, there were 603,000 and whatever number there was. And then the second count was a little bit less, 600,000 and 1,500, whatever the numbers were. Why do we have to know how many Yidden there were when they left Mitzrayim? And then he goes into the specifics. We have to know that there were 4 camps. There's a Machane Yehuda, and there's a Machane Reuven, and there's a Machane Ephraim, and there's a Machane, I forgot what the 4th one is. Done. Yeah? And this one had so many thousands, and this one had so many thousands. So you look in Sifrei Kabbalah, you understand why. Because the Torah is saying how it is Lamaila. This is Lamaila, and the 4 Machres of Yidden correspond to the 4 Machres of Malachim. In other words, it says in Zohar that the Torah is not just telling us a story that happened, but that the story that happened reflects what was going on Lamaila. That's why it's part of Torah Semes, because it's a Davar Nitzchi. There's always 600,000 Yidden. I saw from the Rebbe, no, this is also on Maimon HaMuzgir. I find this interesting, and Mistam it says in Kuzi, but the Rebbe doesn't bring a makar, that when the Rebbe was asked the question of how do you know that Har Sinai happened? And when you say, my father told me, so the answer becomes, yeah, but this guy's father told him that Muhammad came, this guy's father told him that Pliny came, this guy says that Chveisver. So the Rebbe answers that whenever you ask a question about the veracity of one historic event against a different historic event, you have to look at what people are saying. 12 people came out of the desert and they say they saw kach v'kach. 8 people came out of the desert and they said they saw kach v'kach. By us it was 3 million people who came out of the desert and said kach v'kach. And the Rebbe writes, there never were, in the entire history of the world, there never was a time that there was less than 600,000 Yidden alive telling the same story. The Rebbe writes that expression. There was never a time that there were fewer than 600,000 Jews telling this story. And that's what he writes. I say, this is, what's the Rebbe hesber for why he writes this, I don't know. But perhaps it's connected to this, because the 600,000 Neshamas go to the Shadish of Neshamas Yisrael. So we now learned something new. What we learned is we all start out the same, and then we come down in very, very different forms. And of course, there's a lot of different dynamics to this. One of the dynamics is the idea of Gilgulim, Right? The original neshamas were very, very big. They had great shlichusen, they had great koiches, and there were unbelievably high expectations upon them. I saw a sikha from the Rebbe, that the Rebbe speaks about Golus of the Aseres HaShvatim. You know, the Aseres HaShvatim, the 10 tribes, the nation of Israel, or Samaria, some people like to call it Shemrei, were exiled about 100 years before the Churban Abayis, or more. In times of Yeshaya and Novi, they were exiled. And there's a very strange Gemara. But the Gemara says the last of the kings of Yisrael was a man by the name of Hoshea ben. He took down the roadblocks that prevented Am Yisrael from going to the Beis HaMikdash. Right? Yeravam ben Nevat was made a melech. Yeravam ben Nevat gave Gol Sheba Gedelu. And the Chazal say it, Mishnah says in Masechet Avos, Chota v'hechte yesarabim. It was the biggest Aved, the biggest Rosh. He put a Avodah Zarah in Don, he put a Avodah Zarah in Beersheba. He didn't let Yidden be able to go. Why? It was politics. Imagine there's two kings that are competing, but there's only one temple, and it belongs in the nation of your competitor, of your enemy. How do you retain a sovereignty like that? He didn't want Yidden to go to the Beis HaMikdash. He made it impossible. He put up a roadblock. If you tried to go, they'd kill you. Push it. So people of Yisrael did not go Taliyah L'Regel. So Hoshea ben Elah took this roadblock down, and 2 years later, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. I'm sorry. 2 years later, the Malchus Yisrael was Nigla, was exiled. Why? So whatever it says, I forgot if it's in the Gemara or it's in Rashi, because the koiler, the noose for this Aveda, for Apping Elah Regel, was on the Savar of one. And by Hoshea ben Elah taking down the roadblock, the koiler, the noose, was no longer Toli B'Tavri Echad, and it became Toli B'Tavri Arabim. In other words, in those 2 years, none of the Yidden of Yisrael went to the Beis HaMikdash, so they earned the Churban. Kum Tachai said that Hoshea ben Elah did a bad thing if he lets the roadblock stay. So the guilt is on him. You can't blame the Yidden. The moment he allowed people to go, v'chulu, v'chulu, v'chulu. So the Rebbe asked a question on himself. I am saying that the Inyan of Mashiach goes over from the Nasi Hador to everybody in the generation. That's a bad thing. Why? So, Kol Zaman, this is what the Rebbe says in the Sikha. Kol Zaman, it's only the business of the Rebbe. So it's Keilar, Hutal, Tzavri HaEchad. But now you're going to give it to everybody, it becomes everybody's Inyan. So the Chachmanu Litzlan. So the Rebbe said, don't worry about it. Your neshamas are so low, you can't do anything wrong, you can only do good. And he's comparing us to the Yidden of Malchus Yisrael, who were Evdei Avodah Zarah, you understand. He says, Meila them, who were Evdei Avodah Zarah, had hoicha neshamas, so they didn't do, there was an opportunity for them to do a mitzvah, they failed to do it, so they were held accountable. Today the Rebbe says, when you give a shlichus to a rabbin, which before belonged to a yochid, a negative can't possibly happen. The positive can happen, the negative can't happen. Anyway, that's the good news. And the bad news is we have teeny tiny little neshamalach with unbelievably deficient hergish, but it's part of the Eibish's plan. So the Alter Rebbe said you should know. Chelik elakami mal mamish doesn't change. It's true there are big neshamas and there are little neshamas, there are high neshamas and there are low neshamas, but it's a constant, it's an absolute truth, it's an unchanging truth that every neshama remains a chelik elakami mal. Let's continue to read. Right, that's a good question. And the answer, as I understand it, is that his neshama does not come from Adam Rishon. The Alter Rebbe was called the Neshama Chadosha. So the Frierdiker writes in the Sichas that Neshamas Chadoshes happen once every few thousand years. No. So how many Neshamas Chadoshes have there been since Sheidish Mebereishis? The Neshama Chadosh is a fantastic idea. Again, I'm not sure. A little bit I heard from my Mashpiyim, a little bit I read, and a little bit I understood. But there's a Maimah from the Rebbe Rashab, where the Rebbe Rashab says that with the Alter Rebbe, his chilu neshamas de tikkun. Heben zachon neshamas von tikkun. And the Arizal was not a neshama de tikkun. The Shimi was not, the Shimba Yechoy was not a neshama de tikkun. The Alter Rebbe was a neshama chadasha. And the Ikir is, it says that when Mashiach comes, there's going to be new neshamas. All the neshamas are before Mashiach, right? This is what the Rebbe spoke always. Ein ben David ba, at yechelu kol, and neshamas shebaguf. Eitz yesh l'mayla sheshmei guf. And all the neshamas have to come out before Mashiach comes. All the Gilgul. This means all the neshamas that Mashiach has to Adam Rishon. And after Mashiach comes, there's going to be neshamas chadashes, which are going to be much higher, very, very different neshamas. Okay, so let's go. Says the Rebbe, v'kocha mamish kvayach. I am 9 lines I am 9 lines from the bottom of page 10. Davov Amid Beit. V'kocha mamish kayachol, so too mamish. B'sheirish kol hanefesh ruach haneshama shel klolos Yisrael l'mayla. When you want to know the root of the nefesh ruach neshama of klolos Yisrael, of the Jew as he is a collective, that's what the word klolos means. The Jew as he is a collective, not an individual Jew, but as we are part of a collective, as we are part of a whole. And I told you this many, many times, that all over the Tanya, when the Rebbe speaks about Yechida, Pnimius, the Kinyonim, he mentions Klolos Yisrael. Your Pintel Yid doesn't belong to you as an individual. Your Pintel Yid belongs to you because you're a member of Klolos Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, when you look at Yidden as Klolos Yisrael, as a collective, as all of us together, like you say in davening in the morning, yeah? Do you ever wonder why you do this? B'shem kol Yisrael. B'shem yichu kutchabrichu eschinte liyachado shem yutki b'vavki b'chud eshlim. And then you make a statement. B'shem kol Yisrael. Who appointed you to speak b'shem kol Yisrael? You're going to daven. Yeah, yashakech. I thank the Meish with the davens. And you're saying Baruch Sha'amar, and you're a woman with children, so you're a tzaddikis that hasn't been since Sarei Meinu. But how do you come to say, I'm speaking on behalf of every Jew in the world? Every single day, each one of us says it. It's unless we don't speak Hebrew. B'shem kol Yisrael, on behalf of all the Jews in the world. That's not the Pshat B'shem kol Yisrael. As a part of all the Jews in the world. I, as an individual, cannot say that. Who am I to say, I'm a kubul, I'm a tzaddik? But B'shem kol Yisrael, when we look at us as a collective, when we're all one, every Yid has a shaykhas to every Indian, including to the Shem Yichel, Chabrichu, Shchid, and that's why you do it the way we do it. So when the Alter Rebbe is speaking about the Sheidish of the Shamas Yisrael, each one of us, as we are, ideally, he describes us as Klolos Yisrael. How each one of us are a part of the collective of the Jewish people, Lamaila. That, even though we will descend through the worlds from step to step, through the chain reaction of worlds, of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzir, Asi. And of course everybody understands how this works, or if you don't understand, I can't explain it to you, but there's a chain, right? And the process of Leidas Neshamis is described quite similarly to the Leida of a Guf. There's a Rechem, there's a place where the Neshama cooks, and the Neshama sits in Gan Eden, and when the Neshama is in Gan Eden, it's a Ruchni is Dike Indian, or if you want to speak about Gilgul, yeah? When a neshama is in Gan Eden, it's a spark, it's a piece, it's like an individual cell of a neshama from an earlier Gilgul. And when a neshama has to come down into this world, yeah, you were in a previous Gilgul. And before that, you were in a Gilgul before. You came into this world, like it says the Lashon, to do what's called Pachem Ktanim, to map up, to geblib noch epis. Pachem Ktanim, to sweep up some more little jugs. That's Kis Verizal use the expression Pachem Ktanim. That Yankee went back to Pachem Ktanim, so the end of time, our generations, Pacham Ktanim. So there's a neshama that did 99.8% of its mission. And there's 0.02% that has to be still completed. So you got one spark, that neshama, which is close to the parts of the shlichus and the earlier Gilgulim that was left uncompleted. And that one spark is like a cell, a DNA cell. But every single one is a whole baby. And then it cooks. There's a ibur, and the baby, the neshama becomes a neshama, but a machevidim, which is akidim, ruchnim, versteht sich, a spiritual neshama forms. And the good news is, once you're created, you're never destroyed. In Tchias HaMeisim, every single Gilgul exists. Which means those neshamas who completed their shlichus in fewer Gilgulim are going to be less represented in Tchias HaMeisim. Talk about corruption, eh? That's the Taich Yerid that say the Chaliyah. You failed, says Binoch HaGilgul. Now it's a problem, Gilgul Neshamas. Asad Love is going to be a schus. You're going to be represented, Pashat, the 600,000 times 600,000, there's 360 billion. There's not going to be 360 billion people walking around. There's going to be that many people walking around as the number of Gilgulim that were necessary for each of the original 600,000 to fulfill their shlichus. If any guf did as little as one mitzvah, he has Tchias HaMeisim and he's a ganze Matthias. The Luflaching is half. Once he's created, he's a Matthias b'fnei atzmei. So neshama cooks, becomes a Matthias, yeah? But there's different worlds. There's Atzilus, and there's Bria, and there's Yetzirah, and there's Asiyah. And each neshama goes through a different ishtalshalos. Some neshamas come direct from Machos Atzilus into this world. It's called the neshama of Atzilus. Some neshamas come from Machos Abriya. You have it Tanya Perek Nun Beis, right? I think we had also recently Yerush HaKedesh. They come from Machos Abriya, so it's a lower neshama. Some neshamas come from Machos of Yetzirah, and some neshamas come from Machos of Asiyah. And depending from which world you come, you have different koiches, you have different possibilities, and you have different efshariyas. And that's only the beginning of it. Yeah, that's only the beginning. On top of this neshama, there's a concept called levushim. And the levushim come from a lot of places. But the levushim have to do with the parents. And then on top of the levushim, there's a guf. And the guf also has to do with a lot of stuff that's not so exciting, yeah? So after all the ishtalshlus that the neshama went through, there are other layers. And there's the Yetzer Hara, and there's the Nefesh HaBahamis Amachaya. Yeah, it's so complicated, yeah? And a Yid is born. Whatever neshama he has, with all of the challenges that he has, the fact remains he's still connected to its original shade. So where am I holding? Yes? Mechachmasa Yizbarach. It starts out at the Eibush Tes Chachma. K'diksiv, as it says in the Siddur, Kulam Bechachmasisa. Everything was created with Chachma. Now, of course, here you have to read a little different. Kulam Bechachmasisa means the whole world was created with Chachma, yeah? But the whole world created with Chachma is Klippe. How do you go from Chachma to Klippe? It's a long story. But when it says over here, Kulam Bechachmasisa, it's talking about Neshamas Yisrael. Every Neshama is created from Chachma. Nizhavo Mimenu, it creates all Neshamas, including Nefesh, Ruach, or Neshama of Amei Ha'aretz, and Pchusi Eretz. Amei Ha'aretz means simple people, and Pchusi Eretz, people of little worth. That's the translation. Veinik Ved, of little worth, of small value. You can't really measure the value of a person, but people of such. Pchusi Eretz means a person of little value. Like the Rabbi used to bring, his only mile is that he's a beria. The Eibishter created him. These are all sichas that we all know. You don't like the way I look, you think I'm ugly, go to the designer. I didn't design myself, the Eibishter designed me. There's all types. So the Eibishter created Taka, the highest neshamas, the first neshamas. We're learning this week about Avram Avinu, right? It says in Hayem Yem, that's the richtige, freiliche Parsha. A ganze Woche lebt man mit Avram Avinu. Das steht in Hayem Yem. It's one of those Hayem Yems that everybody smiles when you read it, right? Parshas Bereishis starts out good, and the end is a psitazeh, chalamutna, yeah? Parshas Neach finishes with Avram Avinu, but most of the Parsha is a flood and a gefet, a destruction. Parshas Lech Lecha is freilich, and it says in Kabbalah Sfarim, Bo Avram Hischel Ahoyer, Mi Heir, Mi Mizrach was an Avram Avinu, from Avram Avinu had a very lichtik. From Avram Avinu the world becomes a lichtik place. Avram Avinu was Avram Avinu, yeah? And we are his children. And even though there's a lot dissimilar, yeah, there's a considerable difference between how our neshama is made through our guf and how Avram Avinu's guf was made through, the neshama was made through his guf. And by the way, his father was Terach. And Avram Avinu managed to push through all those halamas we stated and to reveal the neshama of Adam Rishon, Avram Avinu, and the guf of Avram Avinu. So the Alter Rebbe says it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. Look at the next words. Ve'im kol zeh. With all of this, nevertheless, it remains tied, it remains uniform. With a unity, with a union which is wondrous and very intense. B'mehusan, v'atzmusan harishan, in its earliest mehus, in its earliest essence, shehi hamshachas chachmei Eloh, which is how it was in chachmei Eloh. So it's taka true that all neshamas start out the same. It's taka true that there's an enormous diversification of neshamas. Like, for instance, the cell of a brain versus the cell of your toenail or of your hair. They all came from the same point. But just like in the biological form, muscle, you understand that it's always connected to the shadish, right? The DNA in your toenail is the same as DNA in your heart. It's the same DNA. Its function is different, its sensitivity is different, its toughness is different, its feeling of life is different, but it's still connected. The same is true in the neshamas. There's big neshamas and little neshamas. We're all connected. Which is the bringing forward of Chachmei Eloh. And of course, you know, Chachmei Eloh is the same thing as Chelik Elikami Mal Mamish, as it's said in the language of Kabbalah. I told this to you. Chelik Elikami Mal Mamish is the language of Chassidus, or whatever Sfarim it is. And in Kabbalah, Chochma Datzilus is Chelik Elikami Mal Mamish, as it's in Seder Ishtalshalos. Ki Yenikas v'chayis. Because the nursing of life, of nefesh, ruach, and neshama shel ami aretz, this neshama of the simplest of people, who mi nefesh, ruach, and neshama comes from the neshama shel tzadikim v'chachamim, the righteous and the wise, who are Roshei b'nei Yisrael shebedeiram, the heads of the Jewish people in their respective generations. So here, the Alter Rebbe adds a little detail, which I already said, but here he adds it in a way that gives it a focus. You start out as 1, and then you become 7, and then you become 600,000, and then you become 600,000 times 600,000. And of course, it's not the pshat that it's only 4, it's many, many layers. The 600,000 neshamas produce secondary neshamas, who produce tertiary neshamas, and so on. It's lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. As low as you go, you're still chachmei Elam. Under all of the layers, there's still a chelik, a leka, mimal, mamish, right? But he has one more kvetch. What's the kvetch? Just like the little neshamas are born, the big neshamas are born. And just like the big neshamas are born, the gigantic neshamas are born. If not in this generation, so in a different generation. And when you say that the little neshamas come from the big neshamas, it's not only true mystically, it's true actually. That when you have in this world, on this earth, a yid with a big neshama, the neshamas of the yidden who are smaller come from the neshama of that greater yid. In other words, just like mystically, the small neshama comes from the big neshama, it's not only mystical, it's actual. Why? Because the big neshamas also come into this world. In the form, what does he call them? Tzadikim v'achachamim, Roshei b'nei Yisrael shebedeiram. So there's a physical people on this earth, at the same time as you, or perhaps at a different time as you. Some are like this, and some are like this. They have larger neshamas. It's a nideh pshat that they're bigger neshamas and you're smaller neshamas. And lamaila you were connected. No. The big neshama of this tzaddik was the source of your neshama, lamaila. And when you come lamata, he's the source of your life as he is a neshama baguf. Which of course sets up what we're going to be learning next week, which is the whole idea of a ladavka bay. That it's not just true that spiritually, that when you in Gan Eden, the little neshama comes from the big neshama. That big neshama comes into this world as a neshama baguf. And the little neshama comes to the world as a neshama baguf. Even as they exist on this earth, the small neshama gets its chayis in his guf from the greater neshama who is also a malubish baguf. And this sets up to ladavka bay, which we're going to learn about in Mitzvah Hashem next week.